Great, and we'll get started. So welcome again to the League of Women Voters of Maine and Maine Citizens for Clean Elections Advocacy webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about our agenda in the legislature. So over the course of this webinar, we will go over our overall priorities for the legislative session, how we came to those. We'll talk a little bit about each of the bills that are part of our agenda and some ways for you to dive into that work on whatever portion of that agenda you're the most interested in. So that you recognize our voices, we are going to introduce ourselves. So my name is Anna Keller. I'm the Executive Director for MCCE and the League.
And I'm Ann Luther. I'm the Advocacy Chair of the Combined Democracy Partnership, the League of Women Voters, and MCCE. I serve as a volunteer in both capacities.
So we've talked a little bit on previous webinars about the missions of the League and MCCE, and they can be best summed up by making democracy work. That is what all of the legislative agenda that we have this year is geared toward. So we know that Maine has a pretty good democracy. We have high voter participation. We have a lot of laws that make it easier to vote here than it is in other places around the country. We have our first in the nation clean elections law and the pioneering work that we've done on ranked choice voting. So it's all really great, but we're not satisfied there. We want to make sure that every Mainer has the ability to have their voice matter in the decisions that are affecting their life, that everyone is able to participate by voting, by being in contact with their legislator, and by knowing that the people that elect them are really representing their interests. So we know that there's still a lot of work to be done before that goal is really achieved. And in this year, we have the opportunity to make real progress on a number of long-term priorities and some exciting new ideas that are going to make Maine's democracy really the best in the nation. So let Ann speak a little bit about how we have gotten from that lofty goal to some concrete policy solutions that are going to achieve it for us.
You know, at the League and MCCE, we try to live our mission of civic engagement. And so the committees that work on advocacy for us, that decide our priorities, that prepare our testimony, that appear in the Statehouse, involve a lot of volunteers as well as staff. And so our team is a combination of experienced volunteers, expert volunteers, brand new volunteers, and very able and expert staff. The committee is a combination of all of the above, and it has grown steadily over the years from, just a handful of us to now around 15. We welcome new members, and that larger committee is divided up into these 5 subject matter expertise subcommittees. So we have one that deals with voting rights, enabling voters to participate in laws that reduce barriers to voting, one that's to do with money and politics, one that's to do with election integrity and making sure that our election systems are safe and secure, to do with election methods. And my screen just went blank so that I cannot see the slide anymore. Anna, what is the last committee that I'm missing there?
Good government, things like ethics reform.
Yeah, thank you. Let me see if I can get that screen back. And so these committees look at the opportunities and the subject matter areas, new developments in national trends, and try to prepare a list of opportunities for us for each legislative session coming up. They weigh those opportunities against several factors. Next slide. And we go through this for each new legislature and even every year at the beginning of each new session. So we consider the timeliness and political climate. Is it likely in the current political climate that this bill is going to have a chance to pass? Do we have a chance to really make an impact with it? Coverage. Do we have someone on our team in our wheelhouse that really knows the issue, can prepare testimony that adds value to the discussion, is prepared to monitor action on the bill, work with sponsors and co-sponsors, and alert our volunteer members to opportunities to participate? Is it important to our members? We at the League are still a membership-based organization driven by our members' interests, by the consensus positions that they've developed over the years, and what's important to members also factors into that equation. Impact. Is there a real need? Are we solving a real problem? Can we make a real difference? You know, there are lots of opportunities to pass legislation that may not really help us in Maine with our particular unique political climate and our particular set of statutes. So we're looking for opportunities that can make a real practical difference. And then alternatives. Are there other players in the Maine political sector who will also work on this? It matters if we're the only one. It matters if there's a strong coalition of partners. It matters if there's another dominant partner so that our value added will be less because somebody else is taking care of it. We take all of those factors into consideration and weigh the opportunities that present themselves to us as we make those decisions. This year, I think we considered quite a long list of titles and winnowed it down to the ones that you're going to learn about today.
Great, and so drum roll, please. This is our legislative agenda for the first session of the 129th legislature. So I'm going to run through these briefly, and then we'll go into more detail about what all of them are. But I am so excited about what this package put together can mean for Maine's democracy. So first we have ranked choice voting constitutional amendment, letting us have ranked choice voting for governor and for the state legislature. We have a bill for primaries for presidential candidates, so we would switch from a caucus system to a primary system to allow more people to participate. We're supporting Maine joining the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, which means that that if enough states signed on, Maine would pledge its electoral votes to the winner of the popular vote, regardless of who won in Maine. You put all of the states doing that together, and we, by function, would have elected the president with the popular vote. Of course, for us, a big part of our agenda is full funding for clean elections. And this year, we're hoping to make progress on a long-term goal, which is a year-round ban on lobbyist contributions. Right now, lobbyists are forbidden from giving to legislators or PACs during the legislative session, but the minute the session's over, they can do it, and we want to have that as a ban year-round. We're also working on a bill that would improve transparency around the election, be able to better understand where errors might show up in the process, and start studying how Maine could use best practices around audits to make sure that our election security is strong. We're also doing a constitutional amendment to allow early voting, true early voting, where your vote would be scanned on when you vote and not have to wait until Election Day for that to happen. And we'll talk more about why that could make a difference. And then finally, we are working on automatic voter registration, which would shift the burden of making sure that you're registered to vote and registered to vote in the right place from the voter who has to do that to putting that more as a function of state agencies to make sure that that happens. So whenever you would interact with a state agency, you would be registered to vote at that new address. And we'll talk more about some of the details of that. But put all of these things together, ranked choice voting, money in politics, working to make sure that our elections are both accessible and secure for as many people as possible. I'm really excited, and I think that this is going to be, if we get all of these, we will make a huge difference. If we get some of them, we'll make a really substantial difference for Maine's democracy.
I couldn't agree more, Anna. It's a really exciting agenda, one of the most exciting that we've taken on since I've been involved with the League. It's really great.
And I did just want to say, because I noticed that we have a couple of questions coming in, we do have the other modules available in our past series where we talked a little bit more about our organizational structure and ways to get involved and about the legislative process itself. Those are available on our YouTube channel, and we can talk more about that at the end. But I just wanted to mention that if you do have questions coming as we go through things, please feel free to write those into the box, and we will probably hold most of the questions until the end of the webinar, but we are seeing them as they come in, and we will get to them. Okay. So we wanted to talk a little bit more about each of these priorities and what they would mean for us.
And this slide is, somewhat humorous, but, only half funny in a certain way, because what it's saying is, the winner of the election was who cares? And that was actually true in the 2016 election, where the number of people who didn't vote outnumbered the people who voted for either of the closely contested candidates. And this is just saying that, people think their vote doesn't matter, people think their vote isn't meaningful, and some of the things that we want to do are designed to flip that equation so that the people who are participating are more invested than the people that are sitting on the couch. So no more woohoo landslide baby for the who cares faction. Let's get those people voting for actual live candidates. And so here's what we are proposing to do about that. Ranked choice voting for governor and state legislature. We really believe that ranked choice voting is a game changer for our state and federal elections, and we look forward to having ranked choice voting applied to state races for governor and for state legislature. We were, of course, very, very pleased with the way it worked in the federal elections in 2018, and we look forward to being able to conduct all our elections that way. We think it provides the voters a richer set of expressions for their candidate preferences on the ballot, and provides more voice to voters who are participating in elections, and we want to broaden the reach for ranked choice voting. The League conducted a study last year on primaries and candidate selection processes, and one of the things that we found among our members was a consensus for presidential primaries instead of caucuses. Some of you may remember that the presidential caucuses in 2016 had a lot of problems. Both parties experienced problems, and there was a big outcry for changing to primaries after that. A bill did come forward in 2016. It languished in the second session in 2017 and 2018. The funding that was required to advance it got held up in a bitterly contested late session last year. But we think there may be support to do this, and we'd like to bring it forward and try again. And if we do it now, there would be a chance for this to go into effect in time for the presidential primaries in 2020. So we're really looking forward to that. And the National Popular Vote Compact, the League of Women Voters has supported direct election of the president by national popular vote for a very long time, but that would require a constitutional amendment. the National Interstate Compact for a National Popular Vote is an alternative path to accomplishing the same mission. It's a compact among the states where each state agrees to commit its electors to the winner of the national popular vote, and it goes into effect, the compact goes into effect when enough states have joined the compact so that the sum of their electors would carry the Electoral College. I think something like 160 electors are sewn up in the compact already. The goal is to get 270, and Maine would contribute its 4 to that total if this passed. It's not a constitutional amendment, and the Maine state constitution is a statutory change, so it would pass by simple majority in the legislature and would be subject to gubernatorial signature. Anna?
Great. And I'm just looking for my next slide. There we go. And I'm going to answer a question that I saw, because I think this might be helpful, which is just someone asked if these are the goals that we're presenting in the order that they are prioritized for us. And that is not the case. We kind of grouped them by things that were related to each other or trying to solve similar problems. These are all priorities for us. Some of them we have a better chance of passing than others. Some of them are going to make a bigger, overwhelming impact for voters than others. But we think that they're all had scored highly on that set of criteria that Anne talked about in the beginning. So money in politics is a big issue that we've worked on for a long time across both of our organizations. And we know that it's important because for our democracy to work, we need to make sure that having more money doesn't mean that you have more power than other citizens. And this is something that we've made a lot of progress on in Maine over the years with our clean election system. It's much easier to run for office without having to have a lot of money of your own or be well connected to wealthy friends or be able to have to take money from the special interest that would lobby you when you were in office. And we've had high participation in our clean election system. 69% of the current legislature was elected using clean elections. But despite that success, we know that the issue around money in politics hasn't been completely solved in Maine. And there's still pieces that are important to tackle around particularly lobbyist contributions, political action committees, and the money that is raised to support the parties. So one thing that we are looking at this year that's a high priority for us is banning lobbyist contributions. So right now during the legislative session, if you are a registered lobbyist or a company or an organization that employs a lobbyist, you cannot give to legislators or to legislator-controlled political action committees. What that means is that the minute the session ends, legislators and legislative leadership starts holding fundraisers, sending out emails to the lobbyist list, and starting to solicit that money right away. It is truly the second the session ends, the first email gets sent. We think that if this is a problem, if lobbyist contributions are a problem during the session, they're a problem the day after the session and the day after that. And so we would like to expand the session ban year-round, so effectively banning lobbyist contributions. This is something that we know would be constitutional, so that's often one of the things we look at around money in politics reform is whether it would be able to pass muster as they get through the U.S. Supreme Court. And we believe that this would, and that it would make a difference in how things work. We're not against lobbying. I'm a registered lobbyist for the League and MCCE, but we're against lobbying that is backed up by political contributions. This is also the first of our bills, I will just say, that is going to come up for a public hearing. We've had a hearing scheduled for it on January 30th. And so this is something that in the short term, we're going to be putting a lot of energy on, and you'll hear more about. Another piece that we are looking at that's related is banning leadership PACs. Right now, if you're a legislator and you use clean elections, you're not allowed to have your own PAC and raise money into a PAC outside of your campaign. But if you don't use clean elections, you can. We would like to extend that so that no legislators would be able to have their own personal political action committees. They can serve as slush funds. They're an extra source of influence over legislators, and we don't think that they're needed. So those two bills are something that we're going to be working on. And like I said, we're also very much concerned always with ensuring that clean elections stay strong, that it's fully funded, that the funding goes into the budget early on, and we don't have to fight for it at the end of the session like happened over this past year, but that it's something that is taken as what Maine voters have twice supported and should be fully funded. And so as we think about all the things we can do around money in politics, really knowing that defending clean elections continues to be a core value for us and something that we will always be fighting for.
This next slide has a lot to do with, things that are going on around the country in terms of laws passed to make it harder to vote, laws passed to put barriers in front of voters, especially with the fall of important sections of the Voting Rights Act, moves that involve voter suppression, closing polling places, eliminating early voting, unfair voter purges. These are things that are going on all over the country. We've been very fortunate here in Maine that we haven't had as much of that as we have seen in other parts of the country. And we've been fortunate that in some of the cases where we have seen those attempts made, we've been able to withstand and beat back the measures. So we remain a leader in voting rights and voter access in Maine, and we really want to keep it that way and improve it. So we have a couple of bills on our agenda that are going to help us improve the voting rights climate here in Maine. One is automatic voter registration that Anna already talked about. It's a measure that many, many, many states are looking at this year, and it is at the root an efficiency and integrity and equality measure that eliminates a lot of paper shuffling, makes sure that voter registration records are more accurate and more timely, and makes sure that when voters go to vote, they're going to be able to present themselves at the polls at their correct address and at their correct polling place. We expect it in many places where the lines at the polls are less to do with access to voting and more to do with same-day registration, that we're going to see the lines at polling places reduced if we can put automatic voter registration into place. And this is a bill that we had worked on in the last session and we're in the last legislature, and we're coming back this time with a set of powerful allies to try to advance automatic voter registration again. Again, efficiency, integrity, timeliness, and streamlining the process, not only for the Secretary of State and the town clerks, but also for ordinary voters. And then we want to try again at true early voting. This was also a measure that we worked on a couple of times before. This would be a constitutional amendment because the Constitution requires that actual voting take place on Election Day. This would allow voting to take place for a period before Election Day, and different from absentee voting, it would mean that those municipalities choosing an early voting opportunity, in those towns, the voter would be able to cast their ballot, put it directly into the scanner machine or the ballot box, and have it secured until Election Day. This has advantages for voters because they can actually see their ballot go in, If they're voting in a scanner town, they have the advantage of being able to get the diagnostics from that scanner machine to see if they've made an error on their ballot and have a chance to recast it. At the same time, it's a benefit to the town clerks, and many clerks support it because the paperwork and overhead of handling absentee ballots, their envelopes, their signature verifications, and all of the security that goes with processing absentee ballots is very time consuming for them. Where in some municipalities, the number of absentee ballots cast is 50 or 60%. This has an opportunity also to streamline processing of elections for town clerks and election officials. So there are many, many benefits to this bill, and we hope we've come very, very close a couple of times before because the threshold to pass a constitutional amendment is quite high. But we're very hopeful for this bill this particular session. And, going right along with the opportunities for voting and making voting access easier, more transparent, and more efficient, we also have voting integrity. Some of you are probably old enough to remember Ballotgate in 1992, where a campaign operative had the key to the counting room and misappropriated a box of ballots, and there were criminal charges filed, and many election security measures were installed after that. The very well-known lock boxes with their wire seals was a security measure that was introduced because of Ballotgate. Well, times have changed a little bit since 1992. We are a very divided polity, very closely divided between the parties and the political philosophies, and there is so much at stake. Now, the stakes are so high that the opportunity for hijinks in elections cannot be discounted any longer. So some of the measures that we want to put into place have to do with securing our elections. We want to make sure that elections are both accessible and with high participation, and at the same time secure and transparent. So we have a bill that includes a few measures to make sure that citizens know where they have an opportunity to observe the process, where their rights to know pertain in elections, how they can interact with their town election officials to make sure that elections are being conducted correctly in their own town, to make sure that there are process checks in place that are open to public inspection, to make sure that measures are available to deter criminal efforts in elections, and finally, to investigate whether Maine should consider adopting a protocol for post-election ballot audits. We would like to work with the Secretary of State's office to develop a recommendation regarding audit technology, and we're hoping to work with them through the course of advocacy on this bill to develop an approach that we can all agree on.
Well, thanks, Anne. That was a good summary, I think, of why so many of the bills that we're working on are related to each other. As we advance voter access, it's important to make sure that we're also looking at the security and integrity of the elections. We want people to feel confident showing up to vote and knowing that their choices matter. So both transparency about the counting process and things like ranked choice voting that give voters more choices are both addressing that problem. So we see all of these bills as interconnected and pieces of a whole. It's also not the entire whole. We know that more than 100 bill titles related to election law have been proposed by legislators this year. The picture that I took that goes along with this slide was of 1 page out of 8 of the packet of the bills that we're sorting through, legislators that we're talking to, trying to get a sense of, beyond our priority bills, which might also be really good ideas that we want to support, really terrible ideas that we want to oppose, things that are interesting but we don't want to have a position on, but we'll still follow and monitor, And we're trying to wrangle many similar bill titles put in by different legislators into the best legislation that they can be, trying to get legislators with similar titles to work together. So it's a big process, and some of our energy, though we try to focus on these priorities, always ends up going to defending against bills that could do harm to our election. So many of the bills have been dealing with issues around photo ID or other measures that are, while intended allegedly to prevent fraud, often end up turning away voters and making it more difficult for people to vote or to register to vote. And so that's, for us, part of why we focus on where we see the real threats to election security, is so that we can continue to strongly oppose bills like photo ID laws, like attempts to repeal same-day voter registration, that make it harder for people to vote. And so we know that there are going to be a number of negative bills on the voting rights area. There's going to be attempts to do harm to clean elections. There are bills to repeal ranked choice voting. We're going to oppose all of those. Given where the legislature is this year, we are not as worried as we might have been in the past about some of those negative bills, but it's still really important that we are there defending the gains that we have made already, as well as pushing forward where we see opportunities. So what's happening right now? Cloture, which is the deadline for legislators to submit bills, was December 31st. And in total, there were over 2,400 bills submitted. Like I said, over 100 on election-related laws. Sponsors are being sorted out. So each of our priority bills, we asked a legislator to put in a title. For example, on ranked choice voting, we asked a legislator to put in the constitutional amendment. There are a total of 9 legislators who have put in variations on a ranked choice voting constitutional amendment, some with different theories of how it should work, some with different language that they're looking at. And there's also the potential for the Secretary of State or other agencies to put in bills as well, and their deadline hasn't come up yet. So we're also watching to see what the Secretary of State might propose around some of our key issues. So a lot of what we're doing, and I was in the State House today trying to do some of this, is we're talking to the sponsors of these bills, trying to get a sense of who feels really strongly that they would like to be the primary advocate for an issue, where they see the nuances of the legislation, and trying to get the strongest champions leading bills and other people signed on as co-sponsors to give each of our bills the best chance that we can to progress. So as that happens, and as the language for each of these bills gets negotiated and refined, some bills are already being printed and being referred to committee to work on. And so I mentioned that one of our priority bills, the ban on lobbyist contributions, has already been printed. I mentioned before that every bill gets a number, and so it is going to be LD for Legislative Document 54. And so LD 54, our lobbyist contribution ban, is actually going to have a public hearing on January 30th. So we are already truly off to the races on this legislative agenda, and it will be a pretty busy time for us between now and June or July when they wrap up. We want to mention a couple of things that are coming up and then address some of the great questions that I've seen coming in. For those of you who may be in the greater Portland area, we're having an in-person discussion about ways to advance this agenda, people that we should be bringing into the process, things that are important to make sure get included in the legislation, in the text of some of these legislation. If you are able to come on January 30th at 5 o'clock, we're going to be at a classroom at USM having this discussion open to the public. We also are having a day at the STATEHOUSE on February 14th. This is a chance to start talking to legislators about these important bills, to try out your lobbying skills in person, and to talk to your own legislator. We're also going to be having a panel discussion at the Blaine House, talking about the lessons that we can learn from the suffrage movement about organizing for voting rights today, including how not to repeat mistakes from the past and exclude people from the progression of voting rights. So that's a really exciting day, February 14th. It is Valentine's Day. It is also the anniversary of the League of Women Voters, which is going to be 99 years old on this February 14th. So we hope that you'll join us in Augusta for that. And I do want to mention that, yes, we are not done with this series of webinars, and we will be going in depth on some of these policy areas for people who would like to learn more about any of these areas. If you're thinking about joining our advocacy team, if you're thinking about wanting to talk to your legislator about some of these issues, we will be having 3 more webinars starting at the end of February, going more in depth on some of those issues. So if there are questions that you haven't asked yet, please do. And I'm actually going to ask Anne to answer the question that we got, whether some of the goals that we have described today are also things that other leagues in other states are working on.
Absolutely. The focus of our entire organization, and we're a federated organization, national, state, and local, the focus of our entire organization across the board is on making democracy work. So voting rights, money in politics, the conduct of elections, all very, very important. Leagues have been involved all over the country on automatic voter registration. Leagues have been involved all over the country on money in politics. The league's national position on national popular vote means that leagues in states where that's a possible reform this year are working on that. I think there's probably no element of our agenda that does not get some attention from sister leagues across the country. Again, we are fortunate here to have some things that are coveted by other state leagues. We already have a publicly financed election system, which many states will be working to get, states and cities also. We already have same-day registration, which many other states will be working to pass this year. So we are in an advantaged position because we have the political culture that we do here in Maine. But the agenda that we're putting forward here is shared by many of our sister leagues across the country.
Thanks. And while we're talking about national agendas, we had a question about HR 1, and I did want to address that a little bit. If you're not familiar, HR 1 is the package of democracy reforms that has been introduced in the U.S. House of Representatives. It's a really exciting package of many of the reforms that we would love to see at the national level, and it really mirrors many of the things that are in our agenda in Maine: automatic voter registration, expanding other bills that would expand voting rights. They have, they're looking at election audits in HR 1. There is a small donor funding program, somewhat similar to clean elections, that's being proposed in it. So many of the things that we work on and care about are in that bill, and it's great to see the national attention that that's getting. I think the general consensus is that it's pretty unlikely that HR 1 is going to be able to go into law, but that this is the most advanced that some of these reforms have gotten at the federal level, and it's great to see the conversation and to see Maine's House delegation has been supporting HR 1. It's great to see them taking that position as well. We had a good question, I think, about the primary system and why primaries instead of caucuses, because caucuses sometimes let us meet with people in our towns and learn more about candidates. And I guess I would love, Anne, since we just finished in a league study on the primary process, if you could speak a little bit more about why primaries over caucuses and some of the logic behind that.
Yeah, I mean, the overriding objective is participation. You know, there is quite a bit of evidence that primaries are going to attract a lot more voter participation than caucuses. Our position is not anti-party. There was a general consensus that political parties and the role that they play should be respected. But the opportunity for many, many, many more voters to participate was the overriding consideration. But also in the mix was the transparency of the process, the opportunity for equal treatment in terms of absentee voting, same-day registration, and as I said, the transparency of knowing who participated, how many participated, how the process was conducted, and having sort of standardized rights between the two parties. The decisions that they make are so consequential. It seemed that some of these considerations should be brought to bear because the result of the primary does have a broad impact on the state of democracy. So the league members who participated in the study felt that the primary system was going to be more reflective of those values in total. Not to mention, facing up. I was just going to say, not to mention facing up to the problems that we did experience in Maine. In a time of high voter participation and high voter interest, it was very, very difficult for some people in Portland to participate in their caucus. And meanwhile, up in more rural Maine, some of the caucuses were conducted on a county-wide basis, and it meant that people had to drive a very, very long way if they were interested in participating, which turned out to be prohibitive for some. So both parties had issues in the 2016 caucus that would be cured by going to a primary system, which incidentally Maine did have. We've had a caucus system for a long time, and then I think for two presidential election cycles between 2000 and 2004, we had presidential primaries, and then it reverted back to the caucus system after that.
Yeah, and presidential primaries is one of the issues that we're working on where we do actually see strong likelihood of some bipartisan support. We've been meeting with leadership in both parties and getting indications that primaries is likely to get Republican as well as Democratic support precisely for those reasons that Anne mentioned, that the caucuses haven't worked very well for either party. We've had questions about bipartisanship. We also had a question about which bills we think are the most likely to pass, and I will do my best to sort of combine the answers because those are related. So we have two constitutional amendments, and constitutional amendments, the one for true early voting and for ranked choice voting for ranked choice voting for governor and for the legislature. Those both are constitutional amendments, which mean they need 2/3 majorities in the legislature. And then if they get a 2/3 majority, each of those would need to be voted on by Maine voters in a referendum. And so it's a two-step process, and it is a big hurdle to clear. For early voting, we have had good bipartisan support. It came very close to passing a couple of years ago, and this is something we've had a lot of indications that will have a strong chance this year. It's still a hurdle to get to 2/3, but I think we're feeling pretty optimistic. With ranked choice voting, it's going to be a harder lift. We know that it has become a much more partisan issue over the last year, and that it's going to be tough to get. We would need 3 Senate Republicans and 5 House Republicans to vote with us in order to get that 2/3 majority. And I think that's going to be tough, but not impossible. So we're going to be working on identifying who are our most likely bets to be convinced to support ranked choice voting from the Republican caucus, as well as ensuring that all of the Democrats and independents are on board. But that one is going to be a hard lift. Going through some of the rest of our agenda, I think that we have a good shot at all of the bills on our agenda this year, which is not actually, when we were looking at this or a couple months ago, something that we thought was going to be the case. And even after the election, I think I was not as optimistic as I am today, having come from being in Augusta and talking to legislators. There is some support for all of our bills, and there's strongest bipartisan support for the election transparency bill, the one that goes to the security and audits question. There's bipartisan support there, and for the presidential primaries and for the early voting. And there is some openings. I think automatic voter registration has been partisan in the past. We're going to work really hard to make sure that it is not a partisan vote this time around. But since it does just need majorities to pass, and Democrats control both houses and the governor, that also has a good shot this time around. Our money and politics bills are often tough because leadership of both parties doesn't necessarily want to change the way that they raise money. That said, I've had some encouraging conversations with legislative leaders about those bills, and we're going to give it a really good shot. So, to summarize, I think we've got a really strong chance for everything, and I think ranked choice voting is going to be the hardest, but something that we really want to try because we think we've got the best shot this year that we're going to have for a while. So I will just say we had some really, really great questions. I really appreciate everyone putting in this thought. And one piece that I think we might have addressed, but I do want to just say a little bit more. We had a question, and I'm just going to read this out. So many people had to wait more than an hour and a half to vote at my polling place. I feel this is a form of voter suppression due to too few voting machines. What is your opinion? And this is a conversation that we've had. Do you want to answer that, Anne?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a problem too. One of the things that is difficult for us is that we don't have comprehensive data or evidence about where these hotspots are and whether the issue is people waiting in line, the same day registration line. Is that the holdup? Is it that the machines are too slow? Is it that the election clerks are too slow? And part of what we're hoping for in our election transparency and integrity bill is that some of those diagnostics would be kept and made public, not necessarily on an individual basis, but on a comprehensive basis, so that we could have better information about where the hotspots for those problems are and what the specific remedies for them are. I mean, in some cases, if it's just not having enough equipment, the answer may actually be pressure on municipal officials to staff up, beef up, open more polling places, make a bigger, more robust polling place. You know, in some of the places, if the holdup is, let's say, in the same day registration line, as I think it was in some prior elections, there's a possibility that automatic voter registration can reduce pressure on those lines. In some polling places, we've heard that the issues have more to do with ballot security, that the scanner machine receptacle boxes are overflowing and the ballots are not properly secured. You know, knowing that would help us advocate for different practices or procurement in terms of the scanner machines and different features on those scanner machines to more effectively take care of and preserve the integrity of the ballots. You know, we've heard not lots of complaints, but we do get complaints every election about student voting. That raises a whole nother set of issues. We've had issues where election officials had inaccurate information in terms of who can help a voter, who's allowed into the voter booth with a voter. You know, so there's such a broad range of ways in which election complaints can be registered and the problems that those complaints can address. But without comprehensive data about the most commonly occurring problems, it's difficult to tell if this is an issue for state advocacy, for local advocacy, or where to put the pressure. So one of the things we really want is some hard data. We want those complaint logs to be kept and summary statistics to be published so that advocates can know where to put pressure to make improvements.
Thanks, Anne. So I am so grateful for everyone's attention as we run through so much information. And I just want to reiterate that this webinar is going to be available within a couple of days. It will be up on our YouTube channel. So if you go to Maine Citizens for Clean Elections on YouTube, you'll see this webinar as well as 3 previous webinars that we've had. We also are going to have more information, including some talking points about each of these bills available online. And we are going to be sending some follow-up out to folks who've been attending these webinars about how to get involved in advocacy or learn more about the particular issues that we've been talking about. I want to reiterate the upcoming opportunities that we've got to stay involved. So we have January 30th, 2 events. During the day, we have the public hearing in Augusta on the lobbyist contribution ban. If money in politics and reducing the influence of special interests over the legislature is something that you care about, we would love to have you come in person, show your support, testify yourself, which can be very simple. We're happy to help with testimony. Or if you can't come in person, you can also reach out to the legislators on the committee, submit written testimony, and we'd be happy to help with that. If you think that that's something you might be interested in doing, lobbyist contribution ban, January 30th, you can email Sarah at mainecleanelections.org. It's up on your screen. We also, on the 30th, have our event, our brainstorming strategy session in the evening in Portland at USM, 5 o'clock. You'll be getting email about that if you live in the greater Portland area. And then on February 14th, we have our lobby day, which is going to be a full day if you want to be there for the full day. But it's going to be a really exciting day of both advocacy and learning. We are going to be meeting with bill sponsors in the morning, going out to lobby your legislator and other legislators, and having a panel discussion at the Blaine House in the afternoon. So February 14th, you have been getting emails about it. You will probably get more emails about it. But please do sign up and come join us for our lobby day. Anne, what have I forgotten?
I think you've forgotten nothing, Anna.
Okay.
No, it's a lot going on, and I just want to underscore that we as an organization and a partnership have never been stronger. We've never put forward a more ambitious agenda, and those of us who have been working on it over the summer and up to this moment couldn't be more hopeful about the future of this work. And so we welcome you all to it and hope that you will join us wherever you can, at the committee level, at the State House, by whatever grassroots means you're comfortable or your time permits.
Thanks. Seconded. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Please feel free to reach out with more questions or to get involved, and we will hopefully talk to you all soon.